The checkered floor gleamed under fluorescent lights that hummed like dying insects. Cassandra Hartley moved between the empty booths of the diner with the mechanical precision of someone who had stopped feeling her own feet hours ago. 3:22 in the morning. The clock on the wall ticked forward with the sound of time eating itself. Outside, the San Francisco winter pressed against the windows, so cold that frost had crystallized into patterns that looked almost like prayers written by frozen hands. She had $5 in her apron pocket. $5 to last until Thursday. The number lived in her chest like a stone. Behind the counter, a man in a charcoal suit the color of expensive smoke sat bleeding into the cream-colored booth by the window. His shirt, white and open at the collar, was turning a darker shade with each labored breath. Dark hair plastered to his forehead. Eyes that burned like something forged in a furnace, even now, even as his body betrayed him. Rafael Calabrese did not belong in a diner at 3 in the morning. The most feared Mafia boss on the West Coast belonged in penthouses, in boardrooms where men trembled before speaking, in places where the air itself seemed to recognize his authority and part like water. Instead, he was here. Bleeding. Alone. Cassandra had no idea who he was. She approached with the practiced distance of someone who had learned long ago not to ask questions that were not her business. A glass of water. A stack of napkins from the dispenser. Standard procedure for the drunk and desperate who stumbled through that door at ungodly hours. "I need to make a call," he said. His voice came out like gravel, like something scraped from deep earth. She pointed to the payphone mounted on the far wall. He didn't move. Instead, he looked at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, as if he were trying to read something written in a language she did not speak. "There is a boy," he said. "At the Meridian Community Shelter on 5th Street. 7 years old. Black hair. Speaks very little. His name is Oliver." Cassandra froze. The glass of water trembled in her hand. "I know who that is," she whispered. For 3 months, Oliver had come to the shelter 3 days a week. Cassandra worked there in the afternoons, between her 2 diner shifts, helping with meals and homework. The boy was quiet, watchful, the kind of child who seemed to carry old sorrows in his small frame. His heart condition had been documented in the intake files. Congenital valve defect. Surgery required within 12 months. Cost, $65,000. $65,000 that no foster family could afford, that no state program could cover, that might as well have been $65 million. She had held his small hand while he slept on the shelter cot. "He is my daughter," the man said. The statement hung in the air like fog that would not lift. "Your daughter," Cassandra repeated, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator and the eternal ticking of the clock. "She was taken from me 8 months ago," he continued. "Stolen by a man who thought it was a good strategy. She has a heart condition. She needs surgery. She needs—" He paused, and something shifted across his face, a crack in stone. "She needs someone to be willing to die for her." He coughed, and blood spattered across the white napkins. Cassandra moved without thinking. She had no medical training. She had no authority here. She was a widow with $5 in her pocket, drowning under $47,000 in her dead husband's debts, a woman creditors called every morning at 6 before she left for her first shift. But she moved anyway. She pressed the napkins harder against his wound. She called the only phone number she knew to call. "I need an ambulance at Chen's Diner on Market Street. Someone is hurt. Please hurry." The dispatcher asked questions. Cassandra answered in single words, her eyes never leaving the man's face. In those moments, she did not think about what he was. She did not think about the black SUVs she would later learn had been circling the block, about the men in tailored suits who had been looking for him all night. She thought only about Oliver's small hand in hers. About a child who needed a father. About the terrible mathematics of a world that could separate them. The sirens arrived 17 minutes later. She knew because she watched the clock. She watched everything. The paramedics rushed past her without seeing her, the way the world always moved past women like her. She stood alone in the diner as they loaded him onto the stretcher, as the machines began their urgent bleeping, as he turned his head one final time in her direction. His eyes found hers across the chaos. "Tell her," he said, each word an effort. "Tell her that I came back." Then he was gone, and the diner was quiet again, and Cassandra stood alone with the checkered floor and the dying neon lights and the $5 in her apron pocket that suddenly felt like the heaviest currency in the world. She did not know that this moment had just rewritten her entire existence. She did not know that the man bleeding in her booth was a legend, that his name moved through the underworld like a curse, that empires of crime had risen and fallen in his shadow. She did not know that her act of mercy had been witnessed by eyes watching from the darkness outside. She did not know that in saving him, she had set in motion a chain of events that would bring her both salvation and danger, love and violence, hope and the kind of fear that hollows out your bones. She only knew that a child she had come to love might now have a chance. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. What happens next will change everything. Now let us go back to the beginning, to understand how Cassandra Hartley arrived at that diner at that exact moment with $5 to her name and the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. 12 hours before the blood pooled in the checkered booth, Cassandra Hartley stood in front of a mirror that had cost 99 cents at a thrift store, and she did not recognize the woman looking back at her. The woman in the mirror had dark circles that makeup could not cover. Her blonde hair, once brushed every morning with her mother's silver brush, now hung limp and tangled, tied back with a rubber band from the mail. She wore a waitress uniform that had faded from navy to something closer to slate, stained at the hem with coffee and something that might have been blood from a nosebleed 3 weeks ago. She had not washed it since because water and detergent were luxuries she could no longer afford to waste. Her hands were rough. Not the kind of rough that looked strong. The kind that looked broken. Calluses upon calluses, fingernails split from the bleach she used to clean tables, a small burn scar on her right wrist from a pan she had bumped while her mind was somewhere else, calculating. Always calculating. Cassandra was 28 years old but looked closer to 40. Her husband had died 16 months ago in a car accident that the insurance company called user error, which was their way of saying they would not pay. Marcus had been driving home from a double shift, exhausted, his eyes closing for just a second on the Bay Bridge. The settlement came to nothing. The medical bills came to everything. $43,000 in debt, and the funeral costs had added another $6,000 more on top of that. Now she owed $49,217 to people whose names appeared on notices stuffed into her mailbox like threatening letters. The most recent one sat on her kitchen table, printed in red ink. Foreclosure. $22,000 by the end of the month or the apartment was no longer hers. The apartment that she and Oliver had shared for 5 years. The apartment where she had taught her son to count. Where they had painted his bedroom walls yellow because he said yellow was the color of safety. The apartment that cost $1,900 a month, which she had somehow managed to pay until 6 months ago, and now she paid what she could and left prayer cards in the mailbox, hoping the landlord would have mercy. He had not had mercy. His name was Harold Chen, and he collected debts the way other men collected cars. Oliver was 6 years old. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's stubborn chin, and he had been born with a hole in his heart. Not a metaphorical hole. An actual defect in the wall between the chambers of his heart, a septal defect that meant every beat of his heart was working twice as hard as it should, pumping blood through places it should not go. The doctors had told her when he was 3 months old that he would need surgery. They had been preparing for it. She had been saving. $50 here, $20 there, taken from her tips and tucked into an envelope hidden in a showbox in her closet. $12,346 over 6 years of careful sacrifice. But then Marcus died. The surgery cost $65,000. Valve replacement. Catheter-based intervention. 12 days. That was how long the surgical waiting list was. 12 days from the cardiologist's appointment yesterday to the operating room. Oliver's heart was beginning to fail. She could see it in the way he grew tired after playing for 10 minutes. In the way he sat down on the stairs some mornings and could not catch his breath. In the way his lips took on a bluish tint when he laughed too hard. 65,000 minus 12,346 left her with $52,654 still needed. In 12 days. She looked in the mirror at her reflection and felt something inside her chest crack like ice on a winter lake. The alarm on her phone screamed at 4:13 in the afternoon. She silenced it and pulled on her uniform, checking the pockets. $1.73 in loose change. She had $5 in her wallet at home. That gave her $6.73 for the rest of the week. Oliver needed new shoes. His feet had grown a full size in 3 months. She had bought them at Goodwill for $8 last month, and now they were pinching his toes. But new shoes would have to wait. The diner was 8 blocks from her apartment. She walked instead of taking the bus because the bus cost $2, and that $2 might become half a meal on a day she could not find enough tips. The November air was cold. San Francisco cold, which meant it cut through your coat and your skin and went straight for the bone. It was the kind of cold that made her wonder if she would ever feel warm again. The sky had cleared completely. Not a cloud. Stars so numerous they looked like someone had scattered salt across black cloth. The weather would be perfect tomorrow. Clear and bright and merciless. Good weather for a city that did not care if you were dying. The diner occupied the corner of Mission and 24th, a place called Stella's that had been there for 37 years. Its neon sign, a pink flamingo with one wing flickering, had been broken for 2 weeks. The owner, a man named Frank who paid minimum wage and did not believe in benefits, had said he would fix it when he found the time. He would not find the time. The sign would stay broken until the neon tube burned out completely, and then he would replace it with LED lighting that cost half as much but looked like the soul had been removed from it. Inside, the checkered floor was black and white. The booths were cracked red vinyl. The counter ran the length of the kitchen, and behind it was a window where Frank or his wife Maria would slide plates of food through to waiting tables. The smell was coffee and grease and something else underneath that, something like resignation. Like the smell of dreams that had been worked to death. Cassandra tied an apron around her waist and clocked in. 8:45 in the evening. She was working until 6 in the morning. 9 hours and 15 minutes. On a good night, she made $40 in tips. On a bad night, she made nothing. She had worked 100 bad nights. There were 3 customers when she started. A trucker in the corner booth who ordered eggs and toast and coffee and did not make eye contact. An old man at the counter who nursed a cup of coffee for 2 hours and left $1 tip. A couple in the booth by the window who ordered the blue plate special and left their plates barely touched. By midnight, the diner had emptied out except for the trucker, who had fallen asleep with his head on his crossed arms. Cassandra wiped tables. She refilled napkin holders. She cleaned the coffee machine. She organized the silverware. She did the things that made it look like she was working so that Frank would not dock her pay if he happened to come by. The clock on the wall above the kitchen window ticked past 1 in the morning. Past 2. Past 3. At 3:13 in the morning, the door opened. Cold air swept in like a living thing, carrying with it the smell of San Francisco winter and something else. Something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Something like the smell of power walking through a door that was not meant to hold it. The man was tall. 6'1", maybe taller. He was broad-shouldered in a way that suggested he had been born that way, not built through years at a gym. He wore a 3-piece suit in charcoal gray. The fabric looked expensive. Not the kind of expensive that you saw at a department store. The kind that cost more than Cassandra's entire monthly rent. The suit was tailored perfectly to his body. His white shirt was open at the collar, showing the top of his chest. A gold chain hung there, catching the fluorescent light of the diner. His dark hair was thick and perfectly styled, and there was silver threading through it at the temples, just enough to add distinction without suggesting age. His face was all sharp angles and darker purpose. His eyes were a gray so pale they looked like ice, and they moved through the diner like they owned it. Behind him came 4 men in black coats. They moved like they had been trained to move, each one aware of every exit, every corner, every potential threat. They arranged themselves at a booth near the window, their backs to the wall, their eyes on the door. They did not order anything. The tall man walked to the counter and sat on a stool. He sat like he was used to sitting in places that were not built for people like him. His eyes found Cassandra's, and something in her blood went cold. "Coffee," he said. His voice was deep. It sounded like it came from somewhere underground. "Black. No sugar." She moved toward the coffee station. Her hands were shaking. "You are the waitress," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir." She poured the coffee. "Black, no sugar." Her hand steadied as she worked. That was one thing about being a waitress. Your hands learned to move even when the rest of you was falling apart. She set the cup in front of him. She did not spill a drop. He lifted the cup and drank it without looking away from her. When he set it down, it was empty. "Another," he said. She poured. This time, he drank it faster, like he was not tasting it. Like he was just trying to fill an emptiness inside himself. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. 3 years, sir." "You have a child." The blood in her veins turned to ice. She did not know this man. She had never seen him before. But somehow, he knew about Oliver. "Yes," she whispered. "How old?" 6. He nodded like this was information he had already possessed. Like he was simply confirming what he already knew. He stood up from the stool. He reached into his jacket and Cassandra flinched, but he was only pulling out a wallet. He placed a $100 bill on the counter. "For coffee that cost $2. "Keep it," he said. Then he walked toward the door, and the 4 men rose from their booth and followed him. They moved like shadows, like they had never been there at all. The pink flamingo neon sign flickered once, twice, and then died completely, plunging the corner outside into darkness. Cassandra stood alone at the counter, holding the $100 bill in her trembling hand, and she realized that her life had just changed in a way that she could not yet understand. Salvatore Marino stood in the doorway of his penthouse office, watching the city lights blur together 40 stories below. The San Francisco skyline sprawled before him like a kingdom he had already conquered and already grown bored of conquering. His tailored charcoal suit was worth more than most people earned in a year. The gold Rolex on his wrist caught the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows. But his eyes, storm gray and hollow, told a different story than his wealth suggested. He was 53 years old but looked like a man carrying the weight of centuries. Carlo knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. In 22 years of working for Salvatore, he had learned that waiting was a waste of time. "The warehouse on 4th Street is secure," Carlo said. "Tyler Brennan's been nosing around, making moves without permission." Salvatore did not turn from the window. How foolish is he? The foolish kind that thinks blood makes him untouchable. A muscle tightened in Salvatore's jaw. Tyler Brennan was his nephew, his sister's son, a man so drunk on family privilege that he thought the rules that governed everyone else did not apply to him. The nephew had been making noise about taking over operations, about expanding into San Francisco's east side without authorization. In Salvatore's world, ambition without permission was a death sentence. But Salvatore did not kill family. He simply made them disappear into a kind of living death, stripped of power, stripped of respect, left with nothing. He turned away from the window. His movements were always deliberate. Every gesture was controlled. "Leave him," Salvatore said. "For now." Carlo's expression flickered with surprise. In 22 years, he had never heard his boss choose patience over swift retaliation. "Watch him," Salvatore continued. "But do not touch him." "Not yet." 3,000 miles away, In a diner on the edge of the Mission District, Cassandra Hartley was counting coins into a coffee cup. 78 cents. That was what remained of her last paycheck after she paid the electric bill. Oliver's school supplies had cost $42. The eviction notice from her landlord was sitting on the kitchen table at home, waiting for her like a predator waits for wounded prey. She was 31 years old but looked like a woman who had already lived twice that long. Her brown hair was pulled back in a bun so tight it pulled at her temples. Her uniform, white with a coffee stain near the collar that would not wash out, hung loose on her frame. She had not eaten today. There was cereal at home for Oliver, but she had given him her portion that morning. The diner was empty at 3 in the morning except for one man in a booth near the window. He was massive, broad-shouldered, with dark hair graying at the temples. Even in the dim light of the diner, she could see the scar running from his left eye down to his cheekbone. He wore a suit that probably cost as much as her monthly rent. He had ordered coffee an hour ago and had not touched it. She approached the table with a coffeepot in her shaking hand. "Refill?" He looked up at her, and something in his expression shifted. His storm gray eyes searched hers like he was looking for something specific. Like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "What is your name?" he asked. "Cassandra." "You work here every night, Cassandra." She felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. Men did not usually notice her. She was invisible in the way that service workers become invisible. She existed to pour coffee and clear plates and vanish into the background. 6 nights a week, she said. "Do you have a family?" The question felt like a violation. She did not know this man. She had never seen him before in her life. The way he asked the question suggested he already knew the answer, which meant he had been watching her. Studying her. She set the coffeepot down on the table with a soft click. "I should get back to your son," he said. "Oliver?" 6 years old. The blood drained from her face. The coffeepot slipped from her fingers. Salvatore caught it before it hit the table. His movements were faster than something so large should have been. "Do not be afraid," he said. His voice was not gentle, but it was not cruel either. It was simply steady, like the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I am not here to hurt you or your child." "How do you know his name?" Cassandra whispered. "Because your son has been staying at the Harbor Street Community Shelter for the past 3 weeks. Because I have been looking for a child who matches his description for 6 months. Because I now understand what has been right in front of me all along." He set the coffeepot on the table and leaned forward. "Sit down, Cassandra." She Saturday. She did not have a choice. Her legs had stopped working anyway. "The child at the shelter," Salvatore said. "The one who draws pictures of birds and tells the other children stories about his mother. The one who says his mother works nights and sells her blood plasma on Saturdays. That is your son." "Yes." The word came out as barely a breath. "His name is Oliver, but the shelter workers call him by a different name. Liam." She was crying now, but she had no idea when the tears had started. "I registered him under my mother's maiden name. I was afraid. The hospital sent so many letters. About the surgery he needs. The valve replacement. $65,000 in 12 days, they said, or his heart would fail. I thought if they could not find me through the normal systems, if they could not trace him to me through his real name, then maybe I could buy time. Maybe I could find another way." Salvatore was quiet for a long moment. In his entire life, no one had ever explained their circumstances to him. People either obeyed or they disappeared. There was no middle ground. No conversation. But he listened to this woman, this widow drowning in a dead man's debts, and something ancient and terrible inside him began to shift. "Your husband?" he asked. "Marcus died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. He had no insurance. The medical bills destroyed everything. The house, the savings, everything. There were debts I did not even know about. Credit cards I did not know he had opened. The bank came for the house 6 months after he died. I have been renting since then, but the rents keep going up. Last month I was $200 short. I had to choose between Oliver's medications and making rent. I chose his medications. She looked at this stranger, this man with scars on his face and death in his eyes, and she felt something crack inside her chest. Why are you asking me these things? Who are you? Before he could answer, Carlo appeared from the darkness near the kitchen. Enzo emerged from the back booth, his hand resting near his jacket. For men in suits that cost more than Cassandra's car moved into position around the diner. The ambient sound of the empty restaurant shifted. The hum of the refrigerator grew louder. The neon sign outside buzzed with static. My name is Salvatore Marino, he said. And as of right now, your son's surgery is no longer your problem. Cassandra did not know that in that moment, she had just become entangled with the most dangerous man in San Francisco. She did not understand what Salvatore had seen when he looked at the drawings Oliver had made at the shelter, or why a photograph of that child had been posted on his office wall for 6 months. She did not know that Oliver was not her biological son, that he had been found abandoned in a hospital 3 years ago during a case she had volunteered to help with, or that the boy she had raised and loved with every broken piece of her heart was the missing piece of Salvatore's own shattered world. What she knew was that her hands had stopped shaking. What she knew was that someone, finally, was offering to help carry the impossible weight she had been dragging alone for so long. Salvatore stood from the booth. He removed his cashmere coat, the kind of coat that costs more than rent, and draped it over her shoulders. You will come with us tonight, he said. Tomorrow, we begin making phone calls. The hospital will receive a check for the full amount. Oliver will have his surgery. You will both be protected. Why? Cassandra asked. Why would you do this? Salvatore's eyes moved to the window, to the frost-covered glass, to the darkness beyond. Because I understand what it is like to love someone so much that you would burn the world down to save them. Because I once failed to protect the person I loved most. And because some debts can only be paid forward. The diner door opened, and the frozen San Francisco wind poured inside like something alive. The frozen wind carried the sound of distant sirens, and Cassandra realized with a clarity that cut through her exhaustion that she had made a terrible mistake. 3 days had passed since that night in the diner. 3 days of sleeping in a guest bedroom the size of her entire apartment, of being driven in black SUVs with darkened windows, of watching Rafael move through his world like a man accustomed to obedience. She had allowed herself to believe it might work. That Oliver could have his surgery. That she could keep him safe. Then Tyler Brennan found her. He arrived at the private school where Oliver had been enrolled, a school Rafael's money had secured in less than 24 hours, and pulled the boy from the playground in front of witnesses. The security detail Rafael had assigned never saw him coming. A man in an expensive suit, confident, moving like someone who had never been told no in his life, and he walked directly to Oliver like the child belonged to him. Cassandra received a call while she was standing in Rafael's penthouse, looking out at the San Francisco skyline stretching endlessly below. Carlo's voice came through tense and controlled. We have a situation. The boy has been taken. The world stopped. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply set the phone down and walked to the window, and the view that moments before had felt like freedom now felt like a cage made of glass and height. 52 stories above the street. Nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. The note arrived within the hour, delivered by courier to the building's front entrance. Cassandra held it with trembling fingers, the paper thin and ordinary, the message written in careful blue ink. I have the boy. He's safe for now. But his safety depends on your cooperation. You're going to call Rafael. You're going to tell him that if he ever wants to see the child alive again, he needs to step down. Walk away from his empire. Leave the city by midnight. In exchange, Oliver lives. Refuse, and I start sending him pieces. Tyler Brennan. Raphael's nephew. The spoiled, entitled son of a brother Rafael had cut off years ago for crimes too dark to name. The boy who had grown into a man convinced that he deserved his uncle's throne simply because blood carried entitlement. Cassandra's hands shook as she read the words again. And again. The numbers blurred. 48 hours. That was how long Tyler had given Rafael. 48 hours to dismantle everything. She thought of Oliver. His small hands. The way he had started calling her Mama just last month, the word coming out uncertain and hopeful, like he was testing whether it was safe to love her. She thought of his heart condition, the valve that didn't close properly, the surgery scheduled for 9 days away. If Rafael gave up his power, there would be no surgery. There would be nothing. But if she called Rafael and told him the truth, Tyler would kill Oliver out of spite. She had no illusions about that. Tyler didn't want the empire. He wanted Rafael to suffer the way Rafael had made him suffer by refusing him money, by refusing him access, by treating him like the liability he was. Cassandra walked to the bathroom and locked the door. She sat on the cold tile floor and finally, let herself break. She did not eat. She did not sleep. She did not leave the penthouse. The hours moved like water, slow and suffocating. The city lights below seemed to mock her with their brightness. She was 28 years old and she had nothing. No money of her own. No way to contact Tyler. No leverage. No bargaining chip except the one thing she could never offer, Rafael's empire. At 2:17 in the morning, sitting in the dark of the guest bedroom, Cassandra made a decision. She would call the police. She would tell them everything. Tyler's name, the demands, the threats. She would destroy Rafael if it meant Oliver lived. Let them arrest her. Let them arrest Rafael. Prison was better than a small body in a plastic bag. She reached for the phone on the nightstand. The door to the penthouse opened. Rafael entered like a storm-given human form, and behind him came Carlo, Enzo, and 12 men dressed entirely in black. They moved without speaking, without hesitation, with the precision of people who had done terrible things together many times before. Rafael's jaw was clenched. His eyes burned like something molten. He was still wearing the black coat from the office, and when he saw Cassandra standing in the hallway, he crossed the space between them in 3 steps and pulled her against his chest. "We have him," Rafael said. His voice was absolute. Final. Like thunder that could not be questioned. Oliver is safe. Tyler will never threaten anyone again. The raid had taken 11 minutes. Rafael's men had moved through Tyler's warehouse in the Mission District like ghosts, silent and lethal. They found Oliver locked in a back office, terrified but unharmed, clutching a stuffed bear one of the men had given him. They found Tyler trying to escape through the rear entrance, and Carlo had simply grabbed him by the back of his expensive jacket and thrown him onto the concrete floor. The rest happened in darkness. In the kind of systematic, methodical way that people learn to fear Rafael Calabrese. Tyler knelt on that warehouse floor, and he begged. He actually begged, his voice cracking like breaking glass, his body trembling like something hunted and cornered. He offered money he didn't have. He offered information he thought was valuable. He offered anything and everything, and Rafael simply watched him with eyes that had become empty. "You made a choice," Rafael said. His voice had gone soft, which was somehow worse than if he had screamed. "You chose to threaten a child. You chose to come into my world and demand my destruction. Now you will learn what that choice costs." By dawn, the FBI was knocking on Tyler's family home. Evidence had appeared, bank records, shipping manifests, photographs documenting drug trafficking operations that stretched across 3 states. Tyler's name was in all of it. His signature. His communications. It was beautiful work, really. Forensic construction so perfect that no jury in the world would doubt it. The news stations picked up the story at 8:19 in the morning. "Local businessman arrested in federal drug trafficking ring," the headline screamed. Tyler's mugshot, looking hollow and destroyed. Interviews with neighbors who suddenly remembered that they always thought he was trouble. Bank accounts frozen. Assets seized. By noon, his legal defense team had abandoned him. By evening, his own family had issued a statement disowning him. Rafael sat in his office and watched it all unfold on the monitors mounted across the wall. Carlo stood beside him, quiet and observant. When it was finished, Rafael turned to look at his lieutenant. "Set up the scholarship fund," Rafael said. "Oliver's name. Full ride to any university he chooses. Make sure his medical records are sealed and protected. Nothing follows him forward." Carlo nodded. He had worked for Rafael for 19 years, and in those 19 years, he had never seen him prioritize a child's future over business. He had never seen him move heaven and earth to protect someone he barely knew. But that was before Cassandra. Before Oliver. Meanwhile, Victoria Ashford was receiving visitors at her penthouse on Russian Hill. Victoria had made her living as a social architect, the kind of woman who could destroy reputations with a whisper and a strategically placed photograph. She had been working on Cassandra for weeks, spreading rumors that the widow was unstable, that she had abandoned previous employers, that she had a history of substance abuse. None of it was true. All of it was believed. But the moment Tyler's arrest became public, the moment his crimes were made evident, every person who had listened to Victoria's poison began asking themselves a single question: if Tyler was dangerous enough to be arrested by federal agents, what had he been trying to hide by attempting to discredit this waitress? The story flipped. Cassandra Hartley, the hard-working widow who had been slandered, suddenly became sympathetic. Journalists dug deeper. They found the diner where she had worked double shifts. They interviewed other waitresses who had seen her eating from the garbage to give her son real meals. They documented the reality of her life in a way that made Victoria's claims look not just false but cruel. By 3:51 in the afternoon, Victoria's social circle had begun to distance themselves. By evening, she had received calls from 3 major charity boards asking for her resignation. By the next morning, her husband had hired a divorce attorney. Victoria sat alone in her penthouse and realized that she had built her entire life on destruction. And when destruction came for her, there was nothing underneath. The warrant for her arrest came 3 days later. Financial crimes. Wire fraud. Conspiracy to commit defamation. Nothing that would put her away for decades, but enough. Enough to humiliate her in the way she had tried to humiliate others. Enough to take everything she had spent a lifetime building. She did not fight the charges. She simply surrendered, and the photographs of her being led from her building in handcuffs became the image that defined her downfall. Cassandra watched it all from the penthouse. She watched as the people who had believed Victoria's lies began to apologize. She watched as the hospital called to tell her that Oliver's surgery was scheduled and fully funded. She watched as her son played in the living room with toys that cost more than she had ever earned in a month, and for the first time in years, his laugh was the kind that came from actual joy. Oliver ran to her and wrapped his arms around her neck. "Mama, when am I going to the doctor's?" "In 8 days, my love," she said. She held him against her chest and felt his small heart beating against hers. The heart that would soon be fixed. The heart that would now have the chance to grow strong. She did not know that Rafael was watching them from the doorway. She did not know that in those first moments at the diner, when she had offered him water and concern for his bleeding wound, something in him had shifted irrevocably. She did not know that he had ordered a background check on the entire shelter, that he had found photographs of Oliver's drawings, that he had recognized in those drawings the same fractured style his own daughter had used in the days before she disappeared. What she knew was that she was no longer alone. What she knew was that her son would live. What she knew was enough. 1 year later, the morning light flooded through the windows of the Cassandra Hartley Foundation, and the space itself seemed to breathe with purpose. The building occupied an entire city block in San Francisco's Mission District, where once there had been abandoned warehouses. Now there were classrooms, counseling offices, a medical clinic with no billing department, a childcare center where mothers could work without drowning in daycare costs. The walls were painted in soft greens and warm yellows, and photographs covered every surface. Women with their children. Families being rebuilt. Cassandra stood at the entrance, signing a new student's intake form. She wore a simple black blazer over a cream blouse, her hair no longer pulled back in the exhausted knots of the diner days, but styled with intention, falling in waves past her shoulders. She had earned her high school equivalency in 6 months. Completed a business degree in 18 months through accelerated evening classes. Now she held a non-profit certification and sat on 3 community boards. The calloused hands that had served stale coffee now signed checks. The tired eyes that counted pennies now reviewed program budgets in the millions. But something in her remained unchanged. When she looked at each woman who walked through the door with that same hollow desperation she once carried, Cassandra did not see a client. She saw herself. "We have beds available," she was saying to a woman with 2 small children. "We have case workers ready to meet with you today. Everything we offer here is free. Everything. There are no debt collectors here. No eviction notices. Just help." The woman's knees buckled slightly. "Really?" she whispered. "Really?" Cassandra said, taking her hand. "You are not alone anymore." The diner uniform was gone. The $5 was gone. But the memory of both lived in every decision she made. Meanwhile, across the city in a glass and steel penthouse that overlooked the entire bay, Rafael Calabrese stood in the nursery of his apartment holding a picture book with pages worn soft from use. He was teaching Oliver to read. The boy, now 8 years old, sat cross-legged on the carpet, his small body still fragile but growing stronger with each passing week. The surgery had taken place on a clear November morning, and the valve replacement had been flawless. Oliver's cardiologist now called his progress remarkable. "WHWH when the butterfly comes out." Oliver sounded out the word slowly. "It breaks free from the cocoon," Raphael finished, his voice patient in a way that shocked his men daily. 2 years ago, no one would have imagined Rafael Calabrese reading picture books to a child. 2 years ago, he had been the kind of man who moved through the world like a storm, leaving wreckage in his wake. But children changed things. This child had changed everything. Carlo, Raphael's oldest lieutenant, watched from the doorway. He had been with the boss for 23 years, had seen him order executions without blinking, had watched him negotiate billion-dollar operations with the same cold efficiency of a calculator. But in the past year, Carlo had witnessed something he never expected. He had watched Rafael Calabrese, the man who had murdered his father's killers in cold blood before his 20th birthday, learn to braid a daughter's hair. Learn to sit quietly while a child drew. Learn to comfort instead of conquer. He fell asleep reading to him last night, Carlo mentioned to Enzo, the second lieutenant, as they both stood watching through the doorway. On the floor. Actually sleeping. "When was the last time we saw him sleep?" "Never," Enzo said quietly. "We have never seen him sleep." The empire had transformed. Not weakened, but reformed. The illegal gambling operations had been shut down and replaced with legitimate hospitality businesses. The protection rackets were dissolved. The drug distribution networks had been dismantled and replaced with real estate holdings and tech investments. Raphael had hired lawyers, accountants, consultants. He had built something that could be inherited without destroying the soul of the child who would inherit it. The foundation he created operated in Cassandra's name, though no one outside the inner circle knew that she and Raphael were the same love story that had broken and rebuilt the most dangerous man on the West Coast. What his enemies did not understand was that Raphael had not softened. He had simply redirected every ounce of his ferocity into building instead of destroying. Every contract he had once used to eliminate rivals, he now used to protect vulnerable people. Every threat he had once wielded like a weapon, he now wielded as a shield. The Calabrese Foundation had, in 12 months, funded the opening of 4 facilities identical to Cassandra's. They operated from the corners of poverty like lighthouses. They did not ask questions. They gave money, food, housing, medical care, education, childcare, job training, counseling. They asked only one thing in return. That when you were strong again, you helped someone else who was drowning. On a night in December, exactly 1 year after the hospital called with news that Oliver's surgery would be fully funded, Cassandra found herself standing on the balcony of that penthouse, watching the city lights scatter across the darkness like 1,000 fires. She had come to pick up Oliver after his evening with Rafael. It had become a routine. Monday through Thursday, Oliver stayed with Cassandra at her modest apartment in the Mission. Friday through Sunday, he spent with Rafael in this tower of glass and steel. They shared him carefully, this small boy who had bound them together with threads stronger than blood. She heard the sliding door behind her open. She did not turn around. She recognized his breathing before she recognized anything else. "I have been waiting for the right moment to say this," Rafael said. His voice was exactly as it had always been, low and heavy as stone, but now it carried something it had not carried before. Vulnerability. 1 year, I have been waiting. Every day I drove past the foundation, I saw your name on the building. Every night I helped Oliver read his books, I thought about the woman who taught him to dream. Every morning I woke up in that penthouse, I remembered waking up in that diner. Cassandra turned. Rafael was on one knee on the cold balcony, the city lights behind him turning him into a silhouette. In his hand was a ring. Not ostentatious. Simple. White gold with a single diamond that caught the light like a tiny fire. "I am Rafael Calabrese," he said. "I am the man who built an empire on blood and vengeance. I am the man who ordered people executed without hesitation. I am the man who carried violence like a second language. But Cassandra, I am also the man who has been yours since the moment you offered a stranger water and your concern when he was bleeding on your diner counter. I have loved you since that night. And I will love you until the night I am not breathing anymore." She did not speak. She could not speak. Her hands were shaking. "I do not have the right to ask," he continued. "I do not deserve you. But I am asking anyway. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that a man built on darkness can find light? Will you let Oliver call me father without the complications of circumstance, with only the clarity of choice?" She pulled him up before he could finish. She kissed him there on the balcony, 37 stories above the city, with the wind cutting through her hair and his hands pulling her close like she might disappear if he let go. "Yes," she said. Yes, and yes again, and forever yes. 3 months later, on a day when the San Francisco spring was blooming with unexpected warmth, Cassandra married Rafael Calabrese in the gardens of the foundation that bore her name. No media was invited. No photographers. Just 300 people who understood what it meant to be saved. Women she had counseled. Children she had housed. Family she had rebuilt. And beside them, the men in suits who had once served darkness, now serving light. Carlo and Enzo stood as witnesses, tears streaming down their faces, watching their boss become something they never imagined was possible. A man capable of devotion. Oliver, dressed in a small suit that matched his father's exactly, dropped flowers along the aisle, his small heart beating strong in his chest, healed and healthy and full of the kind of hope that only a child can carry. When Cassandra made her vows, Oliver jumped into her arms, and she held him there against her white wedding dress, laughing through tears, holding both her family at once. That night, at the reception in the foundation's main hall, she danced with Rafael while Oliver slept on a chair nearby, exhausted and happy. The man who had once seemed incapable of gentleness now moved her across the floor like she was made of glass, like she might break if he pressed too hard. His hand was warm against her back. His eyes never left hers. "I have something to tell you," she said. "Tell me," he replied. "I am pregnant." The smile that crossed his face was the kind that transformed him completely. He picked her up and held her against his chest, spinning slowly, and from that moment on, everyone who saw him knew that Rafael Calabrese had found what he spent his entire life searching for. A reason to live that was not built on fear. A reason to breathe that was not built on violence. A family. Meanwhile, in a federal prison in Nevada, Tyler Brennan occupied a cell in the segregation unit, banned from general population because his own fellow inmates despised him. He would spend 42 years in that cell. His appeals had been denied. His money had been seized. His connections had abandoned him. Every person he thought was his friend had testified against him when the time came to choose between justice and loyalty. He lived with the knowledge that he was forgotten. That the man he had tried to take down was stronger than ever. That his attempt to destroy had only consolidated Salvatore's power. Victoria Ashford, the socialite who had orchestrated Cassandra's public destruction, had died by her own hand 3 months after her arrest. The humiliation had been too complete. The viral video of her confessing to fabricating evidence, to paying off the clinic staff, to creating the false medical records, had played across every screen in America. She could not walk down a street without being recognized. She could not attend a restaurant without being asked to leave. By the time she swallowed the pills, she was completely alone. The society women who had once called her confidant would not take her calls. The charities that had borne her name removed her from their boards. She died in a psychiatric facility, and only one person attended her funeral. This story teaches us that real strength is not found in the absence of falling. Real strength is found in always standing back up. Cassandra Hartley was a widow with $5 in her wallet and no reason to believe that tomorrow would be different from today. But she stood up every single morning. She showed up at the diner. She loved her son. She offered kindness to a stranger. And in that choice, in that singular act of standing up when she could have given up, she changed not just her own destiny, but the destiny of the most powerful man in San Francisco. How did this story make you feel? What would you have done if you were Rafael Calabrese? Have you ever known someone who chose love over vengeance? Please leave a comment below and share what is in your heart. Every single comment you leave is a precious source of motivation that helps us continue creating stories that matter. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it with the people you love. We wish all of you watching good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Remember this. No matter how hard life gets, after the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you again in the next video. Goodbye.